Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third of six Responsible Travel and Tourism Forum webinars. My name is Jacqueline Cunel, and on behalf of Baxter Travel Media, we would like to express our sincere thanks to the webinar series sponsors, which is Air Canada, Delta Chelsea Hotel, and the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. These sponsors have supported RTTF from day one, and we thank them for continuing to believe in the work that we do to advance sustainability in the travel and tourism industry. Today's webinar, Preventing Child Exploitation and Strategies to Stop Child Sex Tourism, is clearly a very difficult topic, but one that the travel industry has started to acknowledge as a serious problem and one where they have a role to play in protecting children from being exploited because of tourism-linked activities. These issues are very complex indeed. They involve deeply rooted social economic conditions, culture, human rights, and international law. So this webinar seeks to broaden your understanding and help us to become active participants in fighting child exploitation. Today we have two expert speakers. Mr. Marco Antonio Sotelo, he's the Program Manager for the International Bureau of Children's Rights, and he will provide an introduction to the topic, strategies to prevent the commercial exploitation of children associated with travel and tourism, and show us the travel industry campaigns which are currently underway. And he's calling us from Montreal. We also have the pleasure of having Madame Nathalie Levman. She's a Counsel Criminal Law Policy Section, Department of Justice Canada. And Nathalie will provide us with an outline of the Canadian Criminal Code responses and the enforcement, awareness, and coordination strategies to prevent child sexual exploitation. Welcome, Nathalie, as well. So both presentations will take us to about 1:45 at this Toronto time, and we will have Q&As. Please type your questions as they come up. Tell us who they're for, if they're for one person specifically. I will moderate the session and then compile and actually cluster your questions thematically if necessary. So to get us started, let me introduce you to Marco Antonio. His bio is on the website, so welcome, Marco.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So can I start now?
Yeah, Marco, yeah. Yep,
okay.
Please, go ahead.
Great. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss about this very difficult topic about commercial sexual exploitation of children. And first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I am Program Manager responsible of prevention of sexual exploitation of children at the International Bureau for Children's Rights based in Montreal. We are an international organization working for the implementation of the Convention on Children's Rights and its optional protocols. So we are trying to promote the implementation of the Convention and its optional protocols as well. So our work in regards to commercial sexual exploitation is just linked with the protocol related with this subject. So what I will present to you are basically strategies and also to prevent sexual exploitation of children associated with travel and tourism. And also I will explain to you some key concepts that are very important to know to understand the problem. So first of all, the definition of child sex tourism. First of all, I would like to say something about the definition because there's a lot of controversy about the name that we are giving to this problem, because usually some people they don't use, and I think it's not really accurate to say child sex tourism, as this could be identified as one modality or one form of tourism, and this is not any kind of tourism because this is a violation of children's rights. However, many international organizations, including ECPAT International, that is like a global network working against all the forms of sexual exploitation, they have been using this terminology in order to separate and to identify the commercial sexual exploitation associated with travel and tourism with other or from other forms of sexual exploitation, and basically because the approach is different, the dynamic of the problem is totally different. And just to simplify the terminology, we are using for this purpose the name child sex tourism. However, I think the right way to name the problem is sexual exploitation of children associated with travel and tourism. And other organizations are sometimes using different terminology, but for the purpose of this presentation, I just will simplify and I will use the terminology of child sex tourism. But if we would like to be more accurate regarding the terminology, it's better to use sexual exploitation of children associated with travel or tourism, or sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. So if we want to define the problem, sexual exploitation of children associated with travel and tourism is defined as the commercial sexual exploitation of children by individuals who travel outside of their province, town, or country in order to engage with sexual relations with children less than 18 years old. Next one, please. Okay. First of all, I would like to explain which are the profiles of the sex offenders or the abusers. When I'm saying abusers, I mean basically like the aggressors, the people who are traveling abroad and they are engaging in this kind of relations with people under 18 years old, with minors essentially. So basically we have three different kinds of sex offenders. And the situational abuser, that is the most common situation. The situational abuser is basically the person who is traveling abroad, and this person is not planning his or her trip with the purpose to engage with sexual relation with children. This person could be a person who is traveling for work, for business, for pleasure, for any other reason, and this person is just taking the advantage of the anonymity existing in the destination country, and also for all the context of, I would say, poverty, inequality, or different situations that could be happening in the destination country. Basically, this person is taking also advantage of the availability of basically children and adolescents who are like in the situation of sexual exploitation in the destination country. And this person is saying, why not? I mean, if there is like a place, they are going to a bar or they're going to a nightclub and they are in a group of friends, this person would say, why not? Nobody knows me here, so I can engage in this kind of situation. But it's important to highlight that this person is not planning their trip, his trip or her trip or their trip, in order to engage with sexual relation. Basically, this is something that it's happening at the moment that they are already in the destination country or in the destination place. The preferential abuser, they are the minority of the offenders according to different statistics and different studies. When we are talking about the preferential abuser, we are talking about someone who is planning a trip with the purpose to engage in sexual relation with children and adolescents. The preferential abuser takes advantage of all the different tools that are available online. They use forums, they share information about which are the best places to meet girls and boys under 18 years old. They also take advantage of the new technologies of information and communication in order to keep updated about these kind of things. They organize groups and so on. So, of course, we have had in the past some concrete examples of people who have planned this kind of trip with this purpose. But we have to say that also according to statistics and different studies and according to the media, that preferential abusers are the minority of the cases. And finally, the pedophile, and the pedophile is basically defined as a clinical disorder. And the pedophile is a person who is basically sexually attracted by by children who are basically very, 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 I would say, pubescent. I don't know if this is, sorry for my English, I don't know if this is the right word to define it, but it basically are basically attracted by children who are really very young, and even they usually attracted by children less than 12 years old. The pedophile usually, they don't engage necessarily in sexual relation with minors, because basically what they do is they try to basically, for example, they try to get magazines, they try to get videos, they use, they also watch child pornography, and they try to satisfy their need to watch, to see, and to feel children who are really very, very young. So these people, they are not necessarily paying for services, for sexual services with children, because they basically are just trying to satisfy this sexual need that they have, which is basically a psychological disorder. Many times we would have a situation where the pedophile could be also a preferential abuser, and these kinds of situations have happened in the past. So, but just to clarify that most of the situation of the pedophiles, they are basically people who are not necessarily engaging in any kind of sexual relations, and they are just basically only like trying to satisfy their need by watching child pornography and magazines, or just watching children, or these kind of things that are not necessarily involving a direct sexual contact with children. Okay, now we will talk about the victims, which is the other side of the coin. If we want to talk about the victims, we have to describe which is basically the most common profile of the victims. Victims come mostly from disadvantaged backgrounds, poverty, children or adults who are living in the street or around the beach areas at the touristic destinations. They are part of an ethnic minority. They are out of the education system. They are coming from dysfunctional families, or they have been victims of domestic abuse. So we can say that all these conditions have to be present in order to have a victim of sexual exploitation, because also, and that's the also that I have in my presentation, there might be victims who are coming from middle class. They might be victims who are influenced by the materialism and the consumerism of the society, often as a result of peer pressure, and also because they are people who are not really informed about the dangers of involving in risky situations with adults. So, but I would like to stress the influence of the consumerism in commercial sexual exploitation. This has been defined in Japan with a terminology known as enjokosai. And but of course this is not the most common way to name this, but the sexual exploitation associated with consumerism is when the victim is coming from, I would say, middle class, or even people who are in a very good economic situation. They are not having problems, they are not in poverty or so on. However, the situation of the adolescent is that the media and also the people around, they are basically putting a lot of pressure on this adolescent in order to have a value of him or herself regarding of the things that he or she has. Meaning, like the value of the person is not about what the person is based on what the person has. So it's important to emphasize this because this problem is really growing a lot in many countries, especially in countries that are having like an improvement in their economies in Latin America or even in North America, like rich countries, they're having this problem. We have this problem in Japan, even in Europe. This is a problem that has not been studied deeply yet, but this is something that we really have to analyze because it's really very important to identify which are really the real causes and the roots of the sexual exploitation that is associated with consumerism. But in any case, what I would like to emphasize is that, like many times we have people like this adolescents, they are going, for example, to the university, and for example, in the case of the girls, they want to increase or to improve their status in the society by having better clothes, by having better makeup, by having better guts in general, by having by going to better places who are like the fashion places in town or things like that, in order to get a better recognition of her peers. So that's very, very important because we might have this problem, for example, here in Canada, and the role of the media is really very important because if the media is promoting the consumerism and not promoting the values, we might have, we could have this problem even worse. Um, in other contexts, like in Latin America, common destinations of child sex tourism, and also in Southeast Asia, uh, the general situation of the victims is the situation of victims who are basically coming from poor families. They are part of an ethnic minority. They are basically girls. However, we have a very, very, very large population of also boys who are victims of sexual exploitation of children. But unfortunately, this situation is not really very visible because basically all the taboos that are related with homosexuality and this kind of thing. So the reporting of situation of boys in victims of sexual exploitation is not really very visible at the moment. Um, and also coming for dysfunctional families, and also the victims are very, very often, and also I would say like almost in the 90% of the cases, they have been victims before of sexual abuse inside their families. Well, aggravating factors, we already talked about that: extreme poverty, insufficient law enforcement, demand for sexual contact with children, economical disparities or inequality, and materialism and consumerism, what we already discussed about that. Where? Um, One of the things that is really also controversial are the statistics, the numbers. Many people would like to know how many children, how many adolescents are victims of sexual exploitation around the world. I would like to say that this is really extremely difficult to measure because maybe we will have a number, but this number is associated with the number of reports that the police or the authorities are receiving in certain countries. But this information is regarding the reports that we have received. But all the numbers regarding all the victims that we don't know, and these cases have not been reported, we don't know this information. So I would say that to give a number is really not really, I don't know, serious, I would say, because basically in order to get a real number, we would have to have like a really very deep study and using projections about numbers and so on, and a social study to analyze and to identify which are the groups, to estimate numbers and so on. So there is one statistic coming from UNICEF saying that there are around 1 and 2 million of children who are part of the sex market annually. UNICEF used this number in the past. However, as I mentioned before, we are not sure, and this is something really, really very difficult to estimate, basically because we don't know, we don't have all the reports of the victims. Regarding where, I would like to explain something. First of all, we have classic child sex tourism destination or classic destination of sexual exploitation of children. Like these are countries or places where during a long period of time, unfortunately, they got the bad reputation to be places of where it's possible to find children and adolescents to be sexually exploited. This is the unfortunate case of Thailand and also the case of Brazil, Philippines, some parts of Mexico, and also some parts of the Caribbean like Dominican Republic and Cuba. In these countries, we have had like a very long story of sexual exploitation for many, many years ago. And these countries have been are in the market or have been positioned in the market as destination of child sex tourism, unfortunately. Um, on the other hand, we have to mention that all these countries, and I would like to highlight the particular case of Brazil, they have implemented a lot of measures and they have invested a lot of money in order to fight against sexual exploitation of children related with travel and tourism. Brazil did many campaigns and a lot of information and was disseminated in order to prevent the problem. And I think, and I would say that the situation probably could be a little bit better right now in Brazil after all the efforts and all the money that the government invested on the issue. However, on the other side, we are having emerging CST destinations or child sex tourism destinations. And this is the case of countries where in the past they were not very popular touristic destinations, but after some time, after the economic crisis that this, or economic of situation of internal violence that these countries had in the past, this situation has been overcome in these countries. And right now, the economic situation of these countries and the economy is growing, and also as a consequence of this, the tourism is also growing in these countries. This is the case, for example, in South America of Argentina, that after the crisis that happened at the beginning of this century, basically, Argentina has amazing, an amazing number of tourism coming to the country. This is also the case of Peru. Peru is having like a very solid economy right now, and popular destinations as Cusco, Iquitos, and another cities in the country are right now like considered at high risk for sexual exploitation. This is also the case of Colombia, where Cartagena, another destination at the Caribbean, are right now considered destinations of child sex tourism because right now Colombia is becoming a safer country because the internal violence is it's more controlled right now. There are other examples in other countries, but I wanted to emphasize this particular countries just to give you like some examples. Continue about the where. We would like to mention that where are the places where usually these victims are victims, or which are the places that the aggressors are using in order to commit this crime. We have brothels and private clubs. We have that the beaches and the streets at the tourist destinations are places where it's possible to establish the contact with children. And here is where the role of the facilitators and intermediaries is really key. Because around the beach areas, for example, in some touristic destinations like Dominican Republic or Cuba or any other one, usually the aggressors, they are taking the advantage that there are facilitators who are many times people of the informal sector of tourism, people who are providing services or selling things in the beach. And they are establishing a relationship with this person, and then after that, asking about which are the places where they can go to find girls or to find boys. So that's why beaches and streets are places where it's possible to establish the contact in order to get the information about where to find girls and boys for sexual exploitation. Hotels, hostels are places where this is happening, and something that is becoming more common recently are the rented accommodations, meaning private houses, private apartments, etc. This is something that is happening more recently because essentially like the hotels are implementing more and more measures in order to control the problem. So if the aggressors are renting houses or private apartments, it's more difficult to get any kind of control of the problem. Consequences. Well, we will have like a very, very long list of consequences for the lives of children, but we would like to mention just the most important ones. For the children, long-term psychosocial trauma and also possible physical trauma if they have been victims of physical violence committed by the aggressors. Also health risks to be infected of HIV and other STDs, social exclusion by the family or the community, economic difficulties related with marginalization, because the problem of sexual exploitation is that the victims are always as part of a vicious circle that brings back to prostitution, well, to sexual exploitation, because prostitution is not the right term when we are speaking about children. And they are coming back to this situation all the time. They are excluded from the society because they were involved in that problem, and as they can't be incorporated in the society, they don't have any other option, only the option to come back to the sexual exploitation. And also loss of self-esteem, which is affecting children and causing depression, anxiety, and other psychological problems.
Marco, just sorry to interrupt. We have about another 8 minutes, and you have so many great programs for the industry. I want to make sure that we cover that as well, so that you know. Okay.
Okay. How long time I have?
Well, no more than 8 minutes, unfortunately.
Minutes?
I know. Yeah, it's 25 to 30 minutes.
8
There's
minutes.
just so much to cover. Yeah. So see if you want to move forward to especially some of the travel industry initiatives and.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. No
Thanks.
problem. No problem. Well, you can check in the presentation, about the consequences, and also, about all the other information. So let's go directly to the role of the tourism industry, that I think is the most important part for this. Sex tourism often involves the use of accommodation services, transportation, or other tourist services that facilitate contact with children and enable offenders to stay anonymous in the environment and local population. The tourism industry is in a unique position to inform and sensitize targeted groups, for example, by disseminating pamphlets, information in their websites, campaigns that are implemented by other NGOs, or they can also implement and create their own campaigns. They can also become a key actor in the prevention of sexual exploitation of children. They can protect children at the touristic destination by creating like networks, or by becoming part of the local networks to protect children against sexual exploitation. For example, in Costa Rica, we have local networks against sexual exploitation in the north of Costa Rica, in the province of Guanacaste, for example. We have a local network at the canton of Santa Cruz. And it would be, for example, very important if the tourism industry could be part, for example, of this local network, because they are, as I mentioned before, in a unique position to protect children. Also, they can report suspicious situations to the appropriate authorities, and they can create like protocols, internal protocols, for example, inside the hotels, in order to have all the relevant information about which are the right authorities that they have to contact in case that they are identifying suspicious situations. Also, they are in a unique position to influence decision makers of the government in order to implement laws or to reinforce laws or to change laws regarding the problem of sexual exploitation. There is something very interesting that I would like to show you, and this is a model of bilateral collaboration against commercial sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism, and this is the model that we are using right now in the project in Costa Rica that the IBCR is implementing right now in 2 provinces of this country, are the provinces of Guanacaste and Punta Arenas, that are the most touristic ones in Costa Rica. And this is an example of bilateral collaboration, and I will explain you very briefly how it works. Basically, we have some activities in the destination country and some activities in the country of origin. The main idea of this bilateral collaboration approach is to have a collaboration between a country of origin of sex tourism and a country of destination of sex tourism. We chose in this particular case the relation between Canada and Costa Rica because there are a lot of Canadian tourists who are going to this destination. We have basically 2 main activities that can be implemented in both countries. One of these activities is the strengthening of the collaboration between the police forces of both countries in order to make sure that in this particular case, for example, Canadians could be followed and could be prosecuted in cases that they are involved in sexual exploitation. Also, a bilateral campaign that can be disseminated before the tourist is leaving his or her country of origin and before basically the trip. Also, the activities in the destination country include a diagnostic about how is the situation of sexual exploitation, a mapping exercise to identify which are the most important spots or places of sexual exploitation, a strengthening of the local networks against sexual exploitation, and also working with families, communities, and adolescents at the high-risk areas that are around the beaches in the most touristic areas of the country. Another activity is that we would like to change behaviors, attitudes, and social tolerance among families, communities, youth, and adolescents, and we would like to become them as an agent for the denunciation and the report of the problem. And at the country of origin, which is the case of Canada, we want to raise awareness among the private sector of tourism, which sells trips basically to Costa Rica in order to involve them as part of the campaign and to collaborate in the project. In this way, if we have like a good model, we can replicate this model of bilateral collaboration in other destinations where we will have a similar situation. I will move forward. Okay. Campaigns to prevent commercial sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. I will show you some of good examples. I divided basically the different kinds of campaigns that we have. That maybe this information, I don't know, Jacqueline, if maybe we should go directly to show the campaign. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the visual design of the campaign and all of that is quite impactful. So yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay.
And you can just weave in the you can weave in the the other points as well. And
okay, just to mention very quickly that I would divide basically 3 kinds of campaigns. One campaign that is addressing the potential aggressor and is basically to inform about the law and basically to deter the potential aggressor. The other campaign is directed to the general public and is basically to encourage the people and to promote the reporting of sexual exploitation. And also another kind of campaign is to the private sector of tourism in order to inform about the existing mechanisms of responsible tourism to prevent commercial sexual exploitation of children. And basically, these are the campaigns, for example, that are promoting the code of conduct, for example. So this is an example of campaign that is directed to potential aggressors. The first one is a campaign that the IBCR just did last year and was disseminated in the airports of Montreal and Quebec City, and also thanks to Air Canada, we could disseminate also this campaign at the magazine En Route of Air Canada, which was great because we reached like approximately like 1 million of readers who could see the image, at the magazines on board. And basically the message was, if you can show what you did on vacation, maybe you shouldn't do it. Sex with a minor is a major crime wherever you are. Basically, we wanted to stress the extraterritorial law, that this is something that Natalie will explain in her presentation. And also we have another example from the Canadian government. Child sex tourism is a crime, and we have an image of a guy who is tied because he will be conducted to the jail, basically. Then we have another campaign that the IBCR disseminated by social media, essentially by Facebook, because we want that social media is really very, 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 very spread around right now. And basically, the main objective of this campaign is to promote the reporting. In the particular case of Canada, we wanted to inform the people that they can use the CyberTip website, that is the official channel that Canada has to report incidents of Canadian citizens who are involved in sexual exploitation of children abroad. So CyberTip is a website that every people who is witnessing any incident of sexual exploitation when they are traveling abroad, they can go to this website and they can write. It's totally anonymous, and people can make the report. With this campaign, what we try to do is that we try to inform the people, to promote basically the report, and we wanted people to be aware and to be basically with their eyes wide open, essentially. That's why there's one message saying, don't close your eyes to the sexual exploitation of children. And at the end is, let them know you are watching. Join the cause. When the people was following the Facebook page, then the people is getting, and people can still do that. Oops, I have a problem of connectivity.
No, can't hear you. Everything is fine.
No, but I can't see the presentation. Okay, I can continue.
You got it? Okay. Yeah, you're on slide 19.
Yes, just, okay. So if the people is joining us on Facebook, then the people can get the information about CyberTip and any other mechanisms in order to report incidents of sexual exploitation. Can you move to the next one, Jacqueline?
Sure, of course.
Okay. Then the other example of campaigns, these are campaigns that are used for some countries, by some countries, in order to promote their image as destinations that are protecting children and are also destinations who are promoting the sustainable and responsible tourism. This is the case of Costa Rica, because Costa Rica did a campaign between 2006 and 2007 in order to protect minors from child sex tourism. And basically this is a very interesting message, because they were saying 25% of our territory are protected areas, and 100% of the rights are protected areas. And there is a small message saying that Costa Rica is opening their arms to the people who like the responsible and sustainable tourism. This is a very interesting campaign that is trying to basically show Costa Rica as a destination of sustainable and responsible tourism. And also it can be used in other countries, of course following another model, if they were to promote them as a destination for responsible and sustainable tourism regarding children's rights. Next one, please. Well, then we have the example of the code. Just a very brief explanation that the code of conduct, it's basically a tool of corporate social responsibility that the tourism industry can implement. First of all, they have to sign, and then they can implement all the criteria of the code. The code basically tries to make sure that the company will follow certain guidelines that will support support the protection of children against sexual exploitation. Unfortunately, in Canada, we just have two companies that have signed the code so far. We would really like to try to take this opportunity to encourage other companies that would be interested to sign the code of conduct and get more information about it. If they are interested, they can contact me directly because the IBCR is the national representative in Canada for the implementation of the code of conduct. The next one, please.
Yep.
I think that we are almost done.
Yes.
I just would like to mention good practices that were implemented by the tourism industry besides the code of conduct. And I would like just to mention one example that I really like a lot. That is the example of Atlantica Hotels International in Brazil. Atlantica Hotels is the first large-scale hotel chain in Brazil that adopted a social corporate agenda to prevent sexual exploitation of children and adolescents in tourism. And basically, Atlantica Hotels, they elaborated their own code of conduct, but after that, they adapted this code of conduct to the international guidelines that are the guidelines of the code, of the international, the code that I mentioned before. But basically, the most interesting thing about Atlantica is that they created inside the hotel internal guidelines in order to guide which are the measures that every person at the hotel has to do in the event of an incident or in event of a suspicious incident of sexual exploitation of children. It means that Atlantic Hotels, they have an internal manual that is explaining clearly and in detail which is the role of every person in the hotel, meaning the receptionist, the housekeeping, the person of the general manager, the cleaning lady, the person at the restaurant. Every person can play a role in order to identify any suspicious behavior or in order to report any incident that is related with sexual exploitation. This manual is very clear, and Atlantica, they have conducted several trainings in order to make sure that all their staff, they know these guidelines, they know these procedures, and also they make sure also that the Human Resources Department, they have a very clear knowledge about this manual, because as people might be changing inside the hotels, the Human Resources Department, they have to be really very aware about these guidelines in order to do or to implement a new training for the new staff who is coming, if that's the case. Also, just to finalize, it's important to mention that Atlantica Hotels, they really have supported the dissemination of campaigns in Brazil in order to fight sexual exploitation of children. Right now, I would say that they are totally committed in the fight against sexual exploitation of children in Brazil, and I would say they are leading practically in the country the fight of this problem within the private sector industry of tourism. I think that's it. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and if you have any question regarding any particular point of my presentation, it will be a pleasure for me to answer you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marco. It is such a great presentation. It's so thorough, and there's just so much information. This is almost like a half-day workshop. So thank you very much for that. And again, I'll encourage the participants to write the questions. Natalie, you're on. So we may be running a little bit over. I hope that you can all stay if we be able to complete the presentations and then address your questions. So welcome, Natalie.
Thank you very much. My presentation just disappeared off my screen.
It's on now. You see it?
I just have Responsible Travel and Tourism Forum webinar series, not my I can just tell you when to, if you can move it for me. Does that work?
Yeah, I see it on my screen.
That's not on mine, but you know what?
Okay, yeah, so you go ahead.
I'll just ask you to change the slides when it's time.
Yeah.
Let me start with just a little brief explanation of who I am and what I do. I work for the Criminal Law Policy section of the Department of Justice, and we basically are responsible for identifying gaps, problems with the criminal law and addressing them through amendments to the criminal code. So we were responsible for the amendments back in 1997 that extended extraterritorial jurisdiction in respect of this issue, which I'm going to discuss in further length in a few moments. If you wouldn't mind just turning to the first slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on my first slide because Marco did such a fantastic job explaining what the problems are, and so I think everybody probably has a very good idea of what we're talking about. One comment I will make is that from a law enforcement perspective, we started referring to this problem as the problem of traveling child sex offenders for the reasons that Marco outlined in his presentation. I have also used the phrase child sex tourism because it's really how people have come to know this problem, and so it's handy in the sense that people do understand what that term means. But generally, we're trying to move away from it in the law enforcement context as well. And also from a law enforcement perspective, what we see in terms of the problem as it relates to Canada is offenders that move from richer countries and go to poorer countries because risk factors and vulnerabilities to this kind of exploitative behavior are enhanced in countries where there's a greater level of social, legal, economic marginalization. And Marco's already addressed the demand issue, so I'm going to move right in to international responses on my slide 2. And I just briefly wanted to give credit where credit's due. Really, this issue came to the fore thanks to non-governmental organizations, in particular ECPAT, which was founded in 1990. Its goal is to end the commercial sexual exploitation of children. It's very active, along with other NGOs, on this issue all through the 90s. And in the United Nations context in 2000, Marco alluded to the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Sale of Children, Child Prostitution, and Child Pornography. And that's a very important international instrument in this context, and it does address jurisdictional issues. It requires all countries to extend territorial jurisdiction. Territorial jurisdiction is the rule, and that every country is responsible to investigate and prosecute crimes that occur on its own soil. We are a common law jurisdiction, and common law jurisdictions generally follow this principle. This is the main jurisdictional principle that Canada follows. So anything that involves extension of extraterritorial jurisdiction is an exception to this rule. And in the optional protocol, it suggests that states may wish to extend extraterritorial jurisdiction over nationals who go abroad and commit sexual offenses against children, because it was becoming a very serious problem at that time. Canada is a party to the optional protocol. We ratified it in 2005. Then I've just mentioned quickly the World Congresses Against the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children that took place in 96, 2001, and 2008, and that also served to raise awareness and solidify international commitment to address this problem. It crosses boundaries, and so we need to cooperate with each other to address it from a law enforcement perspective, as well as from a prevention and protection perspective. And so if we could move to slide 3, I'm going to move right into Canadian Criminal Code responses. So as I've said, Canada generally extends jurisdiction over all of the offenses that are committed on its soil. Prior to 1997, we had very few tools, if any, to deal with the Canadian who traveled to another country to commit sexual offenses against children. We really didn't have anything to use to deal with the offenses that were committed abroad. We did have and continue to have a couple of provisions in the code, procuring provisions under Section 212 that could deal with tour operators, for example, who knowingly promote child sex tourism, but nothing that would deal with the actual, the person who's engaging in contact sexual offenses. So in 1997, subsection 7 4.1 was enacted in the code. And what subsection 7 4.1 does is it says that where a national or permanent resident of Canada goes abroad and engages in conduct that would be an offense in Canada if it were committed here under a list of offenses, then Canada can extend extraterritorial jurisdiction over that person in respect of that conduct. You can see on my slide that there are a list of offenses. The 150s are the child-specific sexual offenses. There's incest, bestiality, child pornography, and child prostitution offenses. And I just want to point out that this list actually is not complete because we've had a few more offenses added very recently, and I'm going to address that in a couple of slides from now. Now, generally, the way this provision works is that the responsibility for, the primary responsibility for investigation and prosecution of these types of offenses remains with the destination country. And there are two good reasons for that. The first is the principle of sovereignty of states. It's Canada's right to exercise its jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute offenses that take place on its own soil, and the same rule is going to apply to other countries. And then from a practical perspective as well, it's the destination country that's in the best position to gather the evidence that's required to secure conviction in these cases. And indeed, when Canada extends extraterritorial jurisdiction, it absolutely needs the cooperation of the state, the destination state, in order to gather that evidence. So that's an important point to remember. But the way that this subsection functions is that if for any reason the destination state is unable or unwilling to investigate and prosecute national of Canada or permanent resident of Canada for having committed child sex offenses, Canada can and will extend extraterritorial jurisdiction to ensure accountability. And then I'm just going to move to slide 4. Just an overview of the key elements of how this provision works. So we would have to have an offender, an alleged offender, who was a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. The conduct we're dealing with would have to relate to child sexual abuse or commercial sexual exploitation of children, prostitution, child pornography, that type of thing. Dual criminality is not required. What that means is that regardless of whether it's an offense in the destination country, if it would be an offense if it were committed in Canada, Canada can still extend extraterritorial jurisdiction. So it needn't be an offense in the destination country, and that's an important point because countries have different laws, and in certain cases our laws can be significantly broader than the laws in other countries. So we want to be able to continue to extend extraterritorial jurisdiction even if the country where the offense is alleged to have occurred says, well, it's not an offense here. So that's the origin of that rule. It requires consent of the Attorney General, and this is a formality to ensure that extraterritorial jurisdiction is being extended in appropriate cases. There are lots of implications associated with extending it, so we want to make sure that it's appropriate to do so. The second last bullet, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. It's more of a legal point. We repealed a part of the subsection that required a request from the destination country that Canada prosecute. And we repealed it in 2002 because it was posing some problems. Some countries were interpreting it as a requirement for dual criminality, for example, which wasn't the case. It was more a formality to ensure cooperation from the foreign state, but it was causing problems, so we repealed it. The fact of the matter is, though, if a particular case deals with conduct that occurred prior to 2002, we would still need that request because laws don't function retroactively. So that's why it's still there. And then a final point, which is worth noting, is the rule against double jeopardy. So where an offender has gone abroad, offended, been prosecuted and convicted, served time, etc., in a foreign jurisdiction, and is then returned to Canada, Canada cannot prosecute that person for the conduct for which a conviction has already been secured or a prosecution has been undertaken, because you can't, the Charter prevents a person from being held accountable twice for the same bad conduct. So, for example, you may have read in the newspapers about Christopher Neal. I know Marco referred to him in his presentation. He was recently returned to Canada from Thailand just last month, and he had been in jail in Thailand for sexually abusing very young girls there. Canada could not, in that case, extend extraterritorial jurisdiction in respect of the conduct for which he had already served time. Now, if there is conduct that he has not been held accountable for, Canada may be able to extend extraterritorial jurisdiction in respect of that conduct, but not the conduct for which he was in jail in Thailand. And just a note on the side, how do we deal with these people when they come back? We know they're a danger, potential danger to Canadian children. What you may have read about is that the relevant authorities out in BC sought and received a special kind of peace bond that places restrictions on Mr. Neal, where he can go, rules that he has to follow, etc. So if he violates any of those rules, he can be brought before a judge for violation of them, and he's being monitored by police now. At least that's my understanding of the case based on what I've read in the papers. So I'll move on to slide 5, which goes over some recent law reform that is relevant to this issue. First and foremost, the Protecting Victims from Sexual Offenders Act, which came into force in April of 2011. It requires individuals convicted of a sexual offense abroad to report to a police service within 7 days of arriving in Canada. And what that does is it facilitates the process of having that person registered in the National Sex Offender Registry. And then once an offender is registered in that registry, they have to notify authorities every time they want to travel, either within Canada or outside of Canada. So authorities can monitor where this person is going. Also, Bill C-10 which these provisions came into force in August, so just recently, August of 2012. It added a number of different offenses to that list in subsection 7 4.1, over which Canada can extend extraterritorial jurisdiction. A number of what we call in criminal law preparatory offenses, so they're not contact sexual offenses, but they are addressing behavior that we know occurs prior to contact sexual offense. So internet luring, making sexually explicit material available to a child, agreeing or arranging to have a sexual offense committed against a child. So all of those offenses are now listed in subsection 7 4.1, as are all the trafficking in persons offenses by virtue of a private member's bill that was enacted in June of this year. So as you can see, the offenses or the type of conduct over which Canada can extend extraterritorial jurisdiction is expanding by adding offenses to the subsection 7, sub 4.1. So on slide 6, I wanted to go over a few enforcement, public awareness, coordination issues. Since the enactment of subsection 7 4.1, implicated departments have been working together to try to address, the implementation of this provision and raising awareness of it, etc. Marco's already done a really good job of an overview of what that looks like, but I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of products by the Department of Foreign Affairs that might be useful to you. The links are right in this slide. I understand that the presentations will be provided to anyone who wants them. And also just a note that often in the country reports, Foreign Affairs will identify a particular country as a common destination for child sex tourism, and will note that this is a crime no matter where it happens in the world. So Cambodia is an example of that. In terms of coordination, the RCMP do a lot of that work through their national strategy to protect children from sexual exploitation on the internet and their Canadian Police Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. And I actually managed to get in touch with the inspector who deals with this issue today, and he gave me some very helpful information to impart to you, which I will do right now, but I can also do by email because it involves an email address and phone numbers. Basically, he says one of the best ways to get in contact with the right people if you have a concern about a particular person who you think may be traveling abroad in order to engage in this kind of conduct is to write an email to the National Child Exploitation Coordination Center. So it's ncecc123@belnet.ca, and I'll provide that to you. And I also have a couple of phone numbers, a 24/7 phone number that goes right to the Canadian Police Centre on Missing and Exploited Children, to the right person. And Inspector Passon has also kindly provided his own phone number if the matter isn't urgent. So he's happy to assist personally as well. And of course, we've had ongoing engagement with private sector and industry as this current session exemplifies. And now for my last slide, slide 7. I just wanted to give you a sense of what the Canadian experience has been with this particular provision, the extraterritorial provision that we've been discussing. So far, to our knowledge, we've had 5 convictions under that provision, meaning that Canada extended extraterritorial jurisdiction and was able to secure convictions in 5 cases. The first was the Baker case, and this was the a 2005 case. So he went abroad to Colombia, to Cambodia, I believe the Philippines as well, and he abused very, very young children, prepubescent children. So I think probably we're dealing with a pedophile here, to use, and somebody who actually goes out and seeks to harm children. And he got quite a hefty punishment, 10 years. And then there were, after that, there were 2 cases in 2008 that related to aid workers who were in Haiti, and they were abusing young boys there. Then in 2010, we finally got a conviction in the Donald Klassen case, and he was abusing also very young children in similar countries to Baker, as I understand it. And then there was also John Duarte, who was a priest who ran orphanages in Haiti, and he was abusing teenage boys there, and he was sentenced recently in 2010. So that's to be juxtaposed against information we have about Canadians and permanent residents of Canada who have been convicted and actually served time in foreign jurisdictions, Christopher Neal being the most recent example of that. So you can see how accountability is achieved in these cases. First and foremost, destination country exercises its own territorial jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute, or if for whatever reason the destination country can't, and it may be there may be problems with law enforcement there. It may be that they don't have an appropriate law that prohibits the alleged conduct. Any of these cases arise, Canada can and has extended its extraterritorial jurisdiction under subsection 7 4.1 of the Criminal Code. And that's what I have to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. And thank you very much for your time and for your interest in this very important and significant issue that requires all the help that anyone can give.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for shedding light on this, extraterritorial law. Clearly, there are legal recourses for these crimes, and this definitely raises awareness of to address them. And so thank you both very much. I mean, you're both lawyers, so obviously you have a lot of knowledge to share with us, and we really appreciate it. One of the first questions we had, and I hope that both Mark or if you had a chance of looking at some of the questions on the side. Vicky had a question related to how if accommodation becomes an enabler where a lot of these crimes are committed, what are some of how are they accountable? What liability may they have? Now, since this crime happens across all different destinations, do you know if there are any countries or jurisdictions where the property can be held liable if they are seen as encouraging or promoting their facilities for this?
Okay, I couldn't read the question. Is it in the chat in the site?
Yeah, but yes, it's on the side. It's Vicky was one of the first ones. But the question is it's a summary of what I just said. In essence, do you know if you use as an example Costa Rica, which is I guess is one of the ones that you used as a case study? How are the hotels held accountable if they're seen as using the facilities?
Which are the preventive measures, basically, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation is the possibility of all the different, tour operators, hotels, all the different actors at the private sector of tourism. They can sign the code of conduct. And if they are by signing the code of conduct, they have the possibility to implement different measures in order to prevent child sex tourism. And part of the criteria of the code, one of the criteria is the training for all the staff. And by training all the staff, it's possible that all the staff will be sensitized, and it's possible to raise awareness, and they will know exactly what they have to do to respond in the event of a case or in the event of a suspicious situation of child sex tourism. What has been happening in destination countries, for example, like in the case of Costa Rica, is that all the hotels that have signed the code, basically they, like for example, the receptionists and all the people who are working in direct contact with the tourists, they have the right information about which is the authority that has to be contacted in the event that they are identifying a suspicious behavior. So for example, they have the number of the police, they have the number of the NGOs that are working against the issue, and so on. That's one of the information that has to be provided when we are doing any kind of training to the private sector. They have to know, and they have to have like a consolidated list of information of which are the resources available in the country in order to make the report. Sometimes it's possible that the tourists could go directly to the front desk, and they could say, okay, so I have been witnessing a case of child sex tourism, and I would like to report, because sometimes people, they don't want to go to the police. So sometimes the hotel is the first phase that the tourists, it's seen when they are witnessing this kind of situation. So I would say first, it's important to sign the code, because the code, it's I would say compiling all the most important criteria that the private sector can follow. Secondly, it would be very important to have, for the hotel, hostel, or whatever, to have all the information about which are the key contacts and the key authorities in order to make the report or to make the monitoring and the follow-up of the case. And thirdly, it's really very important to train the staff at the hotels, at the destinations. That would be that.
That's right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so it's definitely a multi-stakeholder approach. There's got to be some policy. They have to sign up to the code of conduct, and perhaps through the whole hotel associations of each one of these destinations, that they sign up to the code, and then that they develop training and raise awareness, develop training, and then from our side in the industry, just also make the tourists aware that they have the ability to report this. So I guess the issue that we have to address is that this happens in a huge number of destinations and jurisdictions. So each one has to deal with it in their own environment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Sherry had a question regarding the anonymous tip, and I think, Natalie, if you can send that information to us.
I will for sure, yes. I'll send it to you right after by email.
Okay. Then we also had Britt and Hamilton. Thank you very much, Britt, for your notes on the work that you do with Vision and as an NGO, and for your statistic as well. If you would like to share some of that, send us an email, and then we will attach it to the presentation. Your question was essentially, what advice do you have for Canadian travel agents? How can they play a role in protecting children? Stephen also asked that question, so I'm consolidating both of them. And you have addressed a little bit of that, Marco, on your presentation in terms of the initiative for the industry. Is there any further comments on that? Do we need to ensure that the travel agent association signs up or encourages their members to be a signatory of the code of conduct and then develop materials?
Yes, I think there is something very important that I would like to emphasize, that is the fact that because one of the questions is regarding a tour operator agency in the destination country. But usually how the code of conduct works is that if for example, we have a tour operator based here in Canada, and usually all the tour operators basically based in a country like Canada, who is basically like selling trips to the south, to Latin America and the Caribbean, if they want to implement and sign the code, one of the criteria for tour operators is to include a clause, in the contracts with tour operators and any other key actor or provide or I would say any other important I would say stakeholder in the destination, or any other provider or supplier at the destination. They have to include a clause in the contract saying that, let's say, for example, if the hotel at the destination is somehow promoting the sexual exploitation or facilitating the sexual exploitation, then the tour operator has the possibility to terminate the contract if this incident is happening. So that's a kind of sanction that the tour operator in Canada can implement if they are, if they have a case where the other tour operator or the hotel that is working with them, if they are doing something, that is facilitating sexual exploitation. One of the measures that can be implemented under the umbrella of the code is just to terminate the contract. And so it means that, it has to be like a common repudiation of sexual exploitation in both sides. So, but I mean, at the same time, the tour operator at the destination country can sign the code of conduct as well and can implement the code of conduct. The idea of tour operators basically is that tour operators based in countries like Canada and so on, it's very important for them to establish contacts and to sign this kind of contracts and to include this kind of clauses in the contracts with the tour operators, hotels, and any other key actors from the private sector that are working with them at the destination country. So this is a way to push them, in order to be, within the law. So something like that would be really very important.
That's a very important point. And as a matter of fact, in the November 14th, I believe, webinar that we're doing on tour operators, we will address that. Essentially, the tour operator deals with the full supply chain, and they do have the ability to influence their accommodation. And this addresses actually Chris Robinson's question as well about tour operators and what can destinations do. And there are case studies for particular British tour operators, First Choice, well, the TUI group, where they do have implemented in their, included in their contracts that they are...
The suppliers.
Yeah, well, the suppliers, and also it's not only related to exploitation of children for sexual purposes, but it's also exploitation, labor exploitation, human rights, and so on. So this encompasses all the codes that the operator is asking the supplier. And then the destination at the grassroots level, they're extremely important because they can observe, they can get feedback, and then they will provide input into the what some of the accommodation the suppliers are doing in destinations. So it's an effort that affects every single aspect of the supply chain within the tourism sector. So if you imagine we have 8 sectors and 28 subsectors, that each one of them has to number one, be aware of the implications. So even at the check-in level, when in transportation, airlines, flight attendants, and so on, that they can detect any potential issues around trafficking or exploitations of other kinds. That's the one step. Then the tour operator cascades down to their supply chain, and that includes taxis, transportation, and they got to work with the destination and the accommodation. So it is very much a concerted effort of every single piece of that value chain within the travel industry to ensure that we are providing preventing this from happening as much as it is possible. So that basically covers most of the questions. I think there was one last one, which is a very difficult one to answer from Sherry, where essentially she says, if if tourism decreases in some of those areas, then not providing, tourism doesn't provide the economic benefit, will that aggravate the situation, and then for child exploitation. So those are broader topics. We can address them along some of the other the webinars, and we have been addressing them through the last sessions that we have done. I think that more or less covers it. Britt, thank you for the link. We really appreciate it for World Vision. I see a lot of people are sending notes that they have to go, so I think we more or less have addressed the key topics. Marco, Natalie, it really has been terrific. Thank you so much for this. Is extremely important work. We will do everything possible to ensure that we can continue to raise awareness in the travel industry about this issue. So thank you again. And for the participants that gone with us, and I'd like to thank everyone for your attention. So we have a few more seminars left. So if you haven't done so already, please register. And as you know, you can download today's webinar under archives, and we'll send you the rest of the information, additional information. Also, please, we're looking for nominations for the 2012 RTTF Awards, so please submit one for your own company or call your friends, nominate others, and you can see all the details there. And just lastly, I would like to again thank our sponsors, Air Canada, Delta, Ted Rogers Schools of Management at Ryerson, and see you all in a couple of weeks for a presentation that is focused on great and